He said, resident naval officer in Tahiti. Could you believe it? Years later, I was in Tahiti, and I stayed there for quite a time. And I got to know a fellow called Freddie Devonish, who was the British consul, and he'd been there in the Navy during the war. And I said to him one day, Freddie, did you by any chance know a fellow called Tony Rankin? And he turned round to one of the girls sitting alongside him. He said, ah, you know what old Pertwee wants to know? He wants to know if we know old Boom Boom Rankin. I said, thank you very much indeed, sir. That's exactly what I want to do. So I went back into another job with Naval Intelligence Division on security staff, which was fun, because I spent a certain amount of time in the war meetings behind the head of Naval Intelligence, and Churchill sat at the end, and he used to smoke his cigars and put these cigars out in an ashtray, and when the meetings were over, everybody would leap up, and I'd leap up, and I'd say, right, sir, carry on, thanks, sir. Thank you, sir. There's, take the papers, and so we'll clear up Mr. Churchill's thing. And I'd take the ashtray with all the cigar butts and like that into a little bag that I carried, and I used to sell the butts for $25. Believe me, a Churchill cigar was worth a lot of money in those days. We were up to all sorts of dodges. I enjoyed my time with NID, particularly because it was a very good tea boy. He made a marvellous cup of tea, and his name is Callaghan, actually, James Callaghan. Yeah, that's him, yes. And he was in the same division. Whenever I see Jim Callaghan now, I say, Jim, make us a cup of tea, this is a good lad. He's lovely. Jon Pertwee, the film director, and a lot of strange people, and we enjoyed the job. I must tell you a couple of things that we did. But you never believe how stupid people can be. I and a friend of mine in the division hired a costume of German officers with the hats up and the Iron Cross and the boots, and we walked, the two of us, the whole way from Piccadilly Circus right up to the BBC, and the whole way up we walked, and people saluted us. Now, if we'd been lynched, it would have been our own fault entirely. You couldn't believe it. I joined then, after that, the Naval Broadcasting Section, and while I was there, a young sailor appeared, and his name was David Jacobs. And he was about 17, he'd lied about his age to get in, and I became one of his greatest friends, and he still is one of my greatest friends, and his mother used to give us the most wonderful food. His father was a fruit merchant in Covent Garden, and so we had wonderful meat, because he used to, you know, swap this for a bit of that, and that, a bit of this, and we lived well. While we were there, we used to go around on trips and listen to people's conversations, and I was fascinated. We were going up from Parliament Square up to Trafalgar Square, and there's a theatre up at the end called the Whitehall Theatre, and had a play on it called Seagulls Over Sorrento. A very popular play, a service play. And there were two girls sitting in front of us, and one girl said, here, Phyllis, I'm going to the theatre Thursday. The other one said, oh yeah, what are you going to see? She said, I think it's called Sea Lions in Toronto. And the other one said, oh, that sounds nice. She said, is that the one with the Chinaman in it? The other one said, no, I don't think so. She said, pity, I like a Chinaman in a play. Now, would you believe dialogue like that? I mean, it is extraordinary. There's nothing funnier. As they say, there's not so queer as folk. And believe me, when you listen to what some people say, I'll give you some examples. One girl said to the other one, said, here, she said, budge up, Phyllis, I've only got one cheek on. She said, how's your dad? She said, oh, he's better, but he still has to stand sideways. I worked at the Café de Paris in London, and I came out of the kitchens. I wasn't going to come down the stairs after Marlene Dietrich and Noah Coward. I hadn't the gall to do that. I came through the kitchens, and the things I heard in the kitchens, I mean, there was one wonderful thing where a waiter came in, and he banged a tray down, and he said, oh, well, he's eaten it. Eaten what? It's incredible, isn't it? I remember listening to Cabaret, and there were two magicians, and one magician turned to the other and said, you know, boy, you've got no idea how difficult it is to get a budgerigar out of a treacle tart. Now, these are all true, I swear. My director, James Hill, who directed Wurzel Gummidge, he heard a lovely conversation where a girl said, so I stood there till my vest was wringing wet. And the other one said, yes, well, you would, wouldn't you? She said, could it have been a horse? She said, no. No, it was nibbled. And oh, no nibbling when I see it. She could it have been a rabbit? She said, no. Rabbits can't reach hanging baskets. Now, what the hell was that all about? Oh, I love it. I love those sort of conversations. Anyway, David and I had great fun in this division. And while I was there, I had to check up on various people saying naughty things on radio. There was a show called Mediterranean Merry-Go-Round then with Eric Barker, and he was being rather rude about my lords of the Admiralty, and so I was sent along to check up on him. And when I was there, he said, I want somebody to shout out something from the audience. And I said, I'll do it. He said, what's your name? I said, Pertwee. And he said, are you a member of the Pertwee family? I said, yes. He said, oh, good, yeah, you can do it. And I had to shout out a line. He and his wife, Pearl Hackney, were arguing. And I had to say, oi, leave him alone. You're always picking on the poor perisher. And she's supposed to turn round and she'd say, who on earth is that? And Eric's supposed to look into the audience and say, oh, that's the Minister of Education. Now, that's precisely the kind of joke I was sent down there to stop him doing. But I got an enormous laugh with it, and I was so proud. It was the first laugh I'd ever had. I'd been a straight actor before. I'd never done something from the audience, and I was thrilled. And so after the show, Eric said, very good, I enjoyed that. You did that well. He said, what were you here for? I said, well, I was a spy. I'm coming here to spy on you and report on you. He said, well, what sort of spy are you going to be? I said, terrible. And he said, do you want to come back next week? I said, yes. So I came back the next week, and I brought a character with me, because I'd heard on the news, and that's Alvarly Dell at the end of the news. Good night. Here is the news in Norwegian, and a voice said, Jeden, Joden, Jeden, Nigger, Grupp, the Bombe. I said, what did they say? And the next day I listened again. He said, Jeden, Joden, Jeden, Nigger, Grupp, the Bombe. So I went to a Norwegian that I knew at the Admiralty, and I said, what does the Jeden, Joden, Jeden, Nigger, Grupp, the Bombe mean? He said, nothing. I said, well, that's what they say every night. He said, well, the bomb bit probably means something to do with bombing. I said, well, it's very strange. So I went to Eric and I said, I've got a character for you. He said, what is it? I said, he's a Norwegian seaman. His name's Svensson. And Eric said, yes, what does he say? I said, he says, Jeden, Joden, Jeden, Nigger, Grupp, the Bombe. So Eric said, is that funny? I said, it will be. And so when we came in on that week, he said, Svensson. And I said, Jeden. He said, how are you? I said, Joden. He said, what have you been doing? I said, Nigger, Grupp, the Bombe. Within a fortnight, practically the entire United Kingdom was saying, Jeden, Joden, Jeden, Nigger, Grupp, the Bombe. And to this day, people sometimes come up to me and say, Jeden, Joden, Jeden, Nigger, Grupp, the Bombe. So I was with him then for 5 years, which is good. I came out of the Navy, and I stayed on with Eric in Waterlogged Spa for years and years and years. And I joined Jewel and Warris in Up the Pole with Claude Dampier, and had a big run with that. And I was doing plays at the same time. I did a play with Ralph Richardson called The Amazing Dr. Clitterhouse. And I did the music hall. I went into the music hall and was working at the Moss Empire Circuits. Music hall was an appalling experience, ladies and gentlemen, in certain theatres. Glasgow Empire, dear God, was not the happiest place to be. But I worked in variety for many, many years, and I enjoyed it. Mrs. Mack at Manchester. There was a young lady who was in the company that I was rather enamoured of, and we were both staying at Mrs. Mack's. And I was this side of the house. She had two houses with a stairway going up here and another house stairway going up there. And this lady friend of mine was staying in the other part of the house, and I was staying in this part. And so I said, you pop up, and I'll pop up and say goodnight. And so about 12:30, 1 o'clock, I crept round, and I crept up the stairs, and sitting at the top of the stairs in a chair. Oh, no, you don't, Mr. Pertwee. No, we have nothing like that in this house. Thank you very much. Get back to your own bed, she said. I knew. I could see the light in your eyes. Wonderful, Mrs. Mack, great lady. I then decided that I'd do something else on radio. And it was a services show, we called it the Navy Lark. And it didn't take us long to get it set up. The BBC takes a long time to do anything now, but it didn't then. It was very, very quick. And I got a producer called Alistair Scott Johnson, a very good writer called Laurie Wyman and George Evans. We were, up until last year, the longest-running radio show in the history of broadcasting. I believe the HUD Lines has now beaten us. We ran nearly 20 years. And it was a joyful occasion, because we all used to meet on a Sunday, 25 weeks of the year, and with Ronnie Barker, Tenniel Evans, Michael Bates. It's a great company of people. Ronnie Barker used to come with stories the funniest stories you've ever heard, because he got them straight from the stock exchange, where all the best stories come from. He was with us for years and years and years, but eventually had to leave because he became so popular in his own right. He hadn't the time to devote to being in the Navy Lark, so he sadly left. Alistair Scott Johnson said, well, who are we going to get to do all the voices that Ronnie does? And I said, get somebody else and I'll bloody well kill you. He said, do you want to do them? I said, yes, I do. I was sick to death of the chief by this time. Right, left end down, the beeps, flip, sir. And I got bored with that, and so I did a myriad other characters. I did about 40 characters for them. There was a character that I did in the Navy Lark called Admiral Birkinshaw, but we called him Admiral Firkinshaw, because we said there are Birkinshaws, but there's no Firkinshaw, so we'll be all right. So there was Admiral Firkinshaw, and he was a terrible character. We got a telegram within 3 hours of transmission saying, I'm seeing my solicitor on Thursday at 10 o'clock to sue the BBC for the defamation of character, yours sincerely, Admiral Charles Firkinshaw. And it was true. The character, that character that I've been doing for years in different forms was the lady who ran the tuck shop in the school I was at Sherburn. And for years, boys said, one long bun, one short bun, please, Mrs. Thompson. And she used to say, thank you very much, Mr. Next. She never knew one boy's name in 56 years, but she had a go. Thank you very much, Mr. Next. Wonderful. And one day when I was doing the Navy Lark, 10/11, Taffy Goldstein speaking, starboard look out here, sir. Taffy Goldstein said, why don't you put yourself up for Doctor Who? I hear Pat Troughton's leaving. I said, well, I don't know, why would they want me? He says, well, you'd be a very good doctor. So I rang my agent and I said, Richard, yeah. I said, I've got a very good idea. How about putting me up to play Doctor Who? Richard? Richard? He said, yes? Oh, so good. I thought you got... No, sorry, I quite understand. It's not a very good idea. He said, no, I think it's a terrible idea. But I'll give it a whirl. And so he rang up to the producer and he said, hello, this is Richard Stone. I'd like to suggest one of my clients to take over from Patrick Troughton as Doctor Who. And they said, who? And he said, Jon Pertwee. Hello? Hello? He said, I had exactly the same reaction, don't worry. And they said, no, we're gobsmacked. Our mouths are hanging open, we can't believe this. He said, why? He said, maybe read you our short list that we've compiled 18 months ago. He said, yes. And they read it, and my name was second on it. It was the most extraordinary thing, and we never knew. I promise you, nobody knew. Daniel Evans didn't know when he suggested it. Nobody knew, but I know for a fact it was true because I knew a young girl who was a PA on the show, an assistant, and she said, no, you've been up for this for about 18 months. They've been talking about it. Now you're all dying to know who the first one was. Well, it was Ron Moody. Ron Moody. He was going to do it, but he couldn't do it, and so I was lucky I got it. Now, there's a story interesting about this. I did a play in London called There's a Girl in My Soup, which was a tremendous hit in England and on Broadway. And so I went to America to play this with Gig Young. Gig Young, myself, and Barbara Ferris. And we did the tour of America, but they never give you a contract for the Broadway production because they're very fly like that. They don't want to give it away. They said, we'll do you the tour and then you have another contract for Broadway if it comes. Well, we were a smash hit on the road, so I was just about to sign my contract for Broadway, when an irate producer came from England and he said, what the hell's name are you doing here? You're supposed to be in England. You're supposed to be doing a pilot for this show. I said, what pilot? He said, we gave you the script based on a character that you played in a thing called Beggar My Neighbour, where you and Reg Varney and Peter Jones and June Whitfield and Patty Coombs, you did this show and it was very successful, and you played a bank manager, and we've written this whole series round this. And you're supposed to be doing it. And I said, well, you never said anything positive. You didn't give me a contract. They said, well, anyway, we are offering it to you now. You're going to come back and do the pilot. And I said, well, it's either coming back to do the pilot or something that may be a complete flop. And I'm giving up a smash hit success on Broadway. You must be joking. No, there's no way. I'm not coming back. And so they said, oh, all right, we'll have to give it to somebody else. And they did. They gave it to Arthur Lowe, and it's called Dad's Army. Could you believe it? I turned down Dad's Army. But still, after all, people turned down the Beatles, didn't they? Yeah. Can't be right all the time. I came back, of course, and I saw Arthur Lowe. Nobody in the world could be funnier than Arthur Lowe. I mean, he corpses me.